Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Knights, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my books and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 8 of Breaking Step. The tents created a large space, much like what Marketplace had been, but with everything larger. Instead of booths, people would live out of the tents, and they were spaced further apart. It was expected that once those would be stuck living. Oh, I see. Once those who would be stuck living there arrived, it would be chaos, much like what he'd experienced when he'd arrived. Again, he couldn't understand the guild's decision to waste workers on paving the path to Stowe Steps instead of building housing for the new runners and more families. Tibs stood in the open space on the other side of the path where the shops were being constructed, along with the two other teams, 2 and 6 of them. The runners had formed 9 teams, and the noble comprised the rest. One group was on a side of the space, the other at the other end, with ample space between them. Amelia had acknowledged Team Tibs as she and her team arrived, but had joined the other nobles. That she'd been the rare noble to take part in protecting Craggle Rock had done little to change the runners' attitude toward her. She was the least horrible of the nobles, but she remained a noble first and foremost. The runners spoke among each other. Don, the only one remaining silent on his team. Tibs answered when addressed, but otherwise waited silently for this, whatever Tirania was going to turn it into, to start, and listened to still get more and more excited. The indication things were now underway was the guards planting the board on the side of the planting the board to the side of the bottom of the steps. To the side of the bottom of the steps. The board at the bottom of the steps on the side. I don't like that, but it minimizes the repetitions. Then adding plaques with names to each of the 9 columns. He couldn't make out the names, but counted 2 and 6 plaque. While the excitement among the runners rose, no one moved. Urania arrived with Commander Iridian, 2 guards, and a handful of clerk types that made out most of those who were working within the guild. She walked up the incline by the stairs until she was even with the 4th step. Iridian remained at the bottom with the guards and clerk, looking at the thin crowd dispassionately. As Tirania looked them over, Tibs felt a shift in the essence wash over them, and beyond his ability to sense. Today marks when life begins anew for you in Craggle Rock. Her voice sounded all around them. In a few days, the Omegas will arrive. Tomorrow, the reconstruction of the town begins, and today, the first team starts their runs. Yes! Stowe yelled. He was the sole person to react, but if lack of enthusiasm at her words registered, Tirania didn't show it. Because of their part in protecting the town, the team of heroes will go first. Ganny! Stowe yelled. Tibs is coming in! Again, if the lack of reaction bothered her, she didn't show it. The lack of reaction at this news from the nobles surprised Tibs. The last time she'd done something like this, their protest had been vocal. Maybe this time she'd informed them ahead of time in private. Or maybe they'd learned there was someone they couldn't bully into agreeing with everything the noble. Maybe. Okay, yeah, let's start with maybe the nobles learned that there was someone they couldn't bully into agreeing with everything they wanted. All right, let's try this again. The lack of reaction at this news from the nobles surprised Tibs. The last time she'd done something like this, their protest had been vocal. Maybe this time she'd informed them ahead of time in private. Or maybe the nobles had learned there was someone they couldn't bully into agreeing with everything they wanted and no longer wasted time arguing with the guild leader. Or should he think of her as sub-leader if she took someone else's orders? Once they are inside, the rest can look over the board to learn in what order the teams will go in starting tomorrow. Because all of you have earned the guild's respect through your action, there will no longer be a fee attached to going in early. The rotation will be done automatically so that over the course of the coming weeks, each team will go in first. Tibbs' silent scoff was voiced by Jackal, Mez, and other runners. The decision had to have more had to have had to be had to have more to do with runners not giving. Yeah, have given. I need to work those out. Trying to not giving coins to the guild for the privilege of going in early months that. Okay, this is not. The decision had to have more to do with runners not giving coins to the guild to for the privilege of going in early for months. Then and what? Then the this is okay. Then the respect she claimed they had earned. All right, let's try this again. The decision had to have more to do with the runners. Oh, okay. Have more to do with. That's what was meant. The runners not giving coins to the guild for the privilege of going in early for months than the respect she claimed they had earned. Had to have more to do. Okay, why do you more to do? Okay, with the runners not giving coins to the guild for the privilege of going in early for months, rather than the privilege she claimed they had earned. Had the nobles bothered giving more than a coin or two by the end? Well, it would be two at a minimum, since Dunn had never managed to pay for the first position on the board. Teams will be required to start at the floor they are ranked at. Start on the floor they are ranked at, so an efficient flow can be maintained, and each team will be allocated fixed amount of time to complete amount of them. Yeah, amount of time. But this is what happens often. Like I read over the word them, said time, and barely noticed the difference. To complete it, if they clear it early, they can venture on to the next one, but still must exit by the end of their allocated time to avoid having teams cross path. Tibbs wondered how she was planning on enforcing it. It wasn't like she could close the door on anyone who stayed beyond when she said. Even with the shield telling them how close they were to when the next team was about to enter, once they started dealing with those creatures and traps, it was hard. It was hard to keep track of time. The Omegas will be an exception, as the first floor is an especially difficult challenge for those who have never run a dungeon before. Each day, 4 Epsilon team, 2 row team will do their run, and 2 row team will do their runs. Were they any Epsilon? Were any of the team Epsilon? A few of the Epsilon runners that survived Sebastian's raid, but wouldn't that have helped them graduate? If there had been enough of them to even, if there had been enough for them even to make a team. None of the rogues or sorcerers were at that rank. Did the leader determine the team's rank, or was it arbitrarily assigned? 2 and 6 teams. If they were all row, meant. Okay, this feels like that would work better. 2 and 6 teams, if they were all row, meant teams Tibbs' team would go in every 1 in 3 days. For every 2 teams that were Upsilon, they'd go a day sooner. Jekyll was going to be happy about that. You are all worthy representative of the guild, she announced, and Tibbs was surprised at the lack of light on her words, considering the lack of respect her decision had shown for them during Sebastian's attack. I look forward to the day you all become adventurers. She walked down the incline, and the 2 guards and cleric headed up the steps. Irdian laughed with Tirania as the clerks motioned, and workers brought tables and placed them next to the board. They watched them set up. Watch them set up. A paper to note what the runners brought out, what they were allowed to keep, how much they were scammed for when the guild forced them to buy an item they'd earned by surviving their run. What are you still doing there? One of the clerk asked on noticing them. She had the blue eyes of water. Go! She motioned up to the stairs. Finally! Stowe exclaimed. You are going to have... Wait a minute, he added when Tibbs reached the 3rd step. What is he doing with you? Tibbs didn't answer. He couldn't. And he expected that without the ice filling him, he would have laid into the sorcerer for making it impossible for Tibbs to talk with Stowe. Genny, what am I supposed to do? He called. If Don's on Tibbs' team, can he use the room I set up? The cleric looked them over and gave Don a reproachful look, but nodded, and they were allowed inside. I guess that if he's on his team, she replied, sounding as if she was arriving. Tibbs must have told him what he can do. Tibbs glared at the ceiling. I think that's a no. Stowe said, and Tibbs would have told me if he was going to tell Don. His presence is going to be a problem, then. How is Tibbs going to practice his other elements? Maybe I can rework the 3rd floor for him to force him apart from the others. Stowe mused. Tibbs won't have to worry then. And how long until Don questions what's happening? He is one of the smarter runners. What is he going to do? Stowe asked, and can he mockingly tell them I'm targeting him? Tell the guild? They think I'm some kind of animal. He paused. Maybe I can just kill him. That's going to take some doing, she replied. Anything that will ensure Don dies will endanger the whole team. Tibbs will be fine, he replied confidently. And so will Jackal, she agreed. But what about Mez and Kumdar? And you know how Tibbs feels about you killing his friends. Stowe grumbled something Tibbs didn't make out as Jackal stopped before the doorway and looked in the direction of the 1st trap room. We can clear this and the 2nd floor if you want, Miss said. We can probably go through them fast enough. It's not going to affect our time on the 3rd. We're the only team going in today, so there's no danger of running into the others. Jekyll let out a breath and placed a hand on the wall. We're heading directly to the 3rd floor. Our esteemed leader chooses to pass on easy loot? Commodore asked. Did the abyss suddenly fill itself? The fighter rolled his eyes. It's you bunch that keeps insisting I stop being an idiot. The loot here's nothing like what we get on the 3rd floor. His voice hardened as the doorway opened. And nothing here gives me the kind of fight I need right now. The creatures have better be extra tough today, because I need to hit something really hard. He stepped through. Tibbs sliced the golem person, then rolled back before it brought down the large hammer where he'd stood. He wanted to ask why a hammer, but, like the previous times, he had to swallow his question as he sensed the corruption that was part of his team. He stood and shortened the blade to that of a knife before etching. Straight lines gather essence, Alistair had explained during the last training session. Where the lines intersected, the essence focused. More lines and intersections meant more and faster gathering. But there came a point where they pulled the essence out faster than the runner could provide it, and control became harder to maintain. It was why the X attack was the only used 2 line and 1 intersection. It couldn't be done so wrong by someone new to it that it would be dangerous. But still, Tibbs still remembered how this had brought him to a knee the first times, as he had so little reserve, and his ability to pull essence in hadn't matched that being drained by the attack yet. He traced 4 lines without thinking about it with 1 intersection, feeding as much water essence as it would take before stabbing the center. The jet of water sent the golem person back into the wall hard enough it broke apart and crumbled, as if instead of being made of flesh and armor, it was made of stone. Lines didn't have to be straight. Alistair had shown them loops and waves and how they added effects, but Tibs hadn't had the time to practice those while distracted. With added complexity, even as light as these were, light? Simple. Even as simple as these were, came the added danger if done wrong. The clang of metal against stone had Tibbs look over his shoulder. Jekyll rubbed his jaw. Not bad. He blocked the next punch, but still not hard enough. His punch caved in the metal helmet. You have ways to go if you're serious about putting me down. He slammed a fist on top of the golem's person's head, and it dropped to the floor, starting to crumble before it was all there. Didn't you make those tougher and stronger? Kenny asked. He dealt with the gnolls easily enough the previous fight. I did, Stowe replied, sounding baffled. That last hit was hard enough. Jaggle should have been sent off his feet. He wasn't even anchored. Tibbs, what's going on with him? Tibbs clamped his mouth shut, glancing at the sorcerer. Don remained at the back with Maz, but with a few gestures, corruption from his fingers. Corruption flew. Oops. From his fingers to the golem person approaching Commodore from behind, hitting it at the joints. He was precise. Tibbs couldn't deny it, and he didn't cower. He took part in every fight, but remained silent. No boasting, no demanding him to be paid attention to. Nobody to be paid attention. No, don't demanding they paid attention to him. He didn't argue with Jackal, mocked Tibbs when he'd missed a trigger and they had to redo a hall to open the passage. Don hadn't said one word in the time since they'd gathered for Tyrannia's announcement. It was the oddest thing about his behavior. While fighting Sebastian, Don never shut up. He had opinions, mockery to throw at enemies and allies alike, victories to claim. The man was full of himself, and during those battles he had no problem letting everyone know. Now, it was as if it had leaked out of him and left. Tibbs had no idea who Don was without his ego. The golem person limbs fell off, the sickly purple consuming them and the torso until there wasn't enough life essence left, and the rest crumbled away. If Don had used that against someone, they would have screamed in pain the entire time, but the golem was as silent as the sorcerer. How's everyone? Jekyll asked, following Commodore's staff strike, shattering. Following Commodore, shattering his opponent with a staff strike. I'm good, Miss said. Don nodded. I have been better, the cleric said, holding his arm against his chest and supporting himself with his staff. The dungeon took your challenge, and it seemed I am the one suffering for it. Tibbs, how about... Jekyll closed his mouth. Tibbs wasn't the only one who had to watch what he said. His friends had gone comfortable with everything Tibbs could do, and the dungeon was one place where they didn't have to worry about it. Do you have any healing potion? The fighter asked. I have one, Mez replied. More than one, actually. The dungeon's focusing on you close combat types, so I haven't needed them. He took his pack and rummaged through it. He took his pack off and rummaged through it. Have I really been neglecting the archers and sorcerers? Stowe asked. If Mez is pointing it out, I'd say you have, Kenny replied. Unlike the boasting the other ranged attackers like to do, he knows you listen. He knows you listen in. Heal up, everyone, Jekyll said. We want to be in top form before we step into that room. He motioned to the crest at the end of the hall. Once Tib put all the pieces in the correct order, it would reveal a lion. So, inside the room, they would play a game of conquest. Anyone notice how much healing potion we've been finding? Mez asked as he handed one of the bottles, a bottle of green liquid to the cleric. Even using them as we need, we're going to have to start leaving some behind if we get as we're getting other loot, as we're getting more different loot. We're gonna have to start leaving some behind as we get different loot. Nothing gets left behind, Jekyll stated. If we have to, I'll turn my shirt into a bag for them. You do know we get nothing out of you exposing yourself like that, the archer replied. You'd rather I use my pants? The fighter asked. I mean, won't your girl mind? Like, she'd care, Mills replied sourly. I mean, since there's something attached there, I have no interest, and I know your man wouldn't let you get close to her, even if you had interest in that direction. What about you, Tibs? Jekyll asked, grinning as he reached for the belt. You going to get something out of... I've seen you naked often enough while you slept in our room, Tibs pointed out. Right. It's what me and Crow do that gets bored by, Tibs replied, then ignored the stairs in favor of heading for the crest. Sliding the squares into the right... just tiles. I'm not sure why I went squares. Sliding the tiles into the right position was quick, then the door opened. As with the previous times, the 5 golem persons were already positioned on the board and different from before. That meant Jackal or Kumdar would have to come up with a new strategy. Jackal stepped behind Tibs and looked in. All right. How about you tell us where we need to stand, Don? And that concludes Chapter 8 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next one will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story, it is up on Royal Road, available for free. If you want to read ahead as well as support me, that is on my Patreon, where I'd say it's about 20 chapters ahead. And if you're looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.